Welcome back to the Brahmin Word, and we are continuing on with our look through the Sermon on the Mount. And we are going back to Matthew chapter 5. We are going to be looking at verses 21 through 37. 21 through 37. And this section really takes on the task that Jesus had in the previous two. So in verses 13 through 16 of Matthew chapter 5, Jesus is really trying to show how we as his followers are supposed to be examples of the gospel with everything that we say and everything that we do. And then in verses 17 through 20, Jesus is really getting to the point where he is not here to abolish the Old Testament or the Mosaic law and the prophets, but he is here to fulfill them. And verses 21 through 37 are great examples of this. He dives into specific topics like anger and lust and divorce and oaths. Retaliation and loving your enemies are also in here in verses 38 through the end of the chapter and 48, but we will get to those on Thursday. There's just a lot here, so I want to split it up just a little bit. But these are examples of this based on how we respond to situations where anger, lust, divorce, oaths, retaliation, loving your enemies could be involved. It is a great example of our witness for why we follow Jesus. It also this section also shows how Jesus is here to fulfill the law. He takes the things that are said in the law, but goes deeper into it. It doesn't mean he changes it. It doesn't mean that he takes it away or destroys it. It just means that he is expanding on it. It just means that he is diving deeper into it. And now he is teaching the crowds that are before him and his disciples that exact same thing. So, Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 37. We're going to start with verse 21. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. This phrase here, you have heard that it was said to those of old, is absolutely repeated in verse 21, verse 27, verse 31, verse 33, verse 38, and verse 43. So the idea is, okay, you know something from the law, whether it be you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery. You know some of this, but I want to go deeper into it. Yes, it's good to not murder. Yes, it's good to not commit adultery. But what does that mean exactly? Let's dive into that. I think that's exactly what Jesus is trying to do here, which would be something very unique, something very just captivating. That it's not just, hey, we're just going to talk about the words of the law, which are good. You shall not murder is good, right? So that's good. But Jesus is showing his authority, being the Son of God. He is trying to show his authority through this, and it is definitely coming across. But let's continue in verse 22. So you shall not murder, and they've heard that, right? But now let's go deeper. Verse 22. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. It's not that Jesus is lessening the charge of murder. It's not that Jesus is saying to go against you shall not murder. Not at all. It's talking about the liable to judgment aspect. Yes, murder should be liable to judgment, but there's a lot more that goes into murdering than just murder itself. A lot of times there is underlying factors. And Jesus is touching on those. But the other big thing that he's touching on here too is sinful anger has judgment to it. It has consequences. It absolutely does. Whether it's just you being angry with someone, whether it's you insulting someone, whether it's you calling, I'm guessing slandering in verse at the end of verse 22, saying you fool. There are absolutely judgments and consequences to those actions. Verse 23. So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Here he's really just getting at the point of, look, if there is some contention between you and someone else, and you are a follower of the Lord, then you need to go take care of that before you go and act like you've got everything together spiritually. It doesn't mean that you can't go and worship. It doesn't mean that at all. What it's trying to say is, look, a big part of you following after the Lord is following after the Lord. And the Lord wants you to repent of the things that you have done wrong. He wants you to obey his commandments. Yes, Jesus is gracious, and yes, he is merciful, but he's also just. He is also just. And so because of that, that's why I think verse 23 and verse 24 verses are getting at. Verse 25, come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly, I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. I think what he's getting at here is don't let your stubbornness get in the way. Most likely, this is probably a civil case. He doesn't really go into details about this quote-unquote situation, but most likely it's probably a civil case instead of a criminal one, knowing that there is some sort of money that is involved. And so wouldn't it be better for you as the one who is being accused, wouldn't it be better for you to just fess up to what you have done and to reconcile with the person that is accusing you? I think that is what is getting at. Instead of drowning in your stubbornness, that will lead to even more consequences, which verse 26 is just talking about you not getting out of prison until you have paid off your debt. So that is, I think, a little bit about verse 26 there. Verses 25 and 26 in that situation. But again, there's more to anger that meets the eye. Same with lust, verse 27. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it down and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. Now, I've always wondered about this section. Don't get me wrong. The first couple verses makes total sense. You shall not commit adultery. Absolutely. But then he, again, goes deeper with it. Verse 28. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Very, very true. But then verses 29 and 30 are really interesting. On the surface, they seem very dramatic. But that's the point, though. Again, you're talking to a broad demographic of people, whether it be age or background, whatever it might be. There is a broad difference. So Jesus is really trying to give an example that grabs your attention. And what better way to do that than if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. Now, does this mean that we are supposed to go blind throughout all of life so that we don't lust after someone? I don't think so. What I think this is trying to get at, though, is accountability. Be accountable to what you are looking at, what you are talking about, what you are listening to. Be accountable to those things and take every single measure to do so. Doesn't mean that you're going to be perfect. It doesn't mean that you're never going to lust ever again. But if you take steps in the right direction of not lusting, then that will extremely help. And it would be better to do that than to not take any sort of accountability and just keep going down that wrong pathway of lust. That's really what is going on in verses 29 and 30. So does that mean that we really have to chop off our arms and gouge out our eyes? No. But it is talking about being accountable with the things that you do, say, and watch and do say, watch, and listen to. So I think that's what it's getting at. Now, verse 31. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, this is a very difficult section to talk about, mainly because of the emotions behind divorce. Jesus is not saying, by the way, to not get divorced entirely. There is this, what we call exception clause in verse 32, except on the ground of sexual immorality. Now, some have questioned abandonment as being a part of sexual immorality. I do believe that abandonment is immoral. And so I personally do put abandonment as part of this exception clause. But when it's talking about divorce, I think what Jesus is really trying to get at or going deeper into is why we should not be rushed into divorce. The reason why he's connecting divorce to adultery is to show the ramifications of divorce. Now, again, there is that exception clause with the grounds of sexual immorality and what I believe to be abandonment as well. There is that exception clause. However, on the most part, what we're trying to get at is this. If you have a couple and one of them wakes up and says, I no longer like my husband or my wife, whoever that might be, then it doesn't mean they could just wake up and go, I want a divorce. Now, that I think is exactly what Jesus is talking about here. If that man divorces his wife, if that wife divorces her husband, then they are committing adultery because marriage is important. Marriage is biblical. Marriage is godly. Marriage is difficult. Marriage is a journey. Marriage has ups and downs, and marriage needs dependence on God to get you through difficult situations, not just with everything outside of your home, but everything inside of your home as well. And I think that is exactly what Jesus is trying to get at. He's trying to show the importance of marriage, and he is trying to also show that, yes, there is a reason to get divorced, but it's an exception. It is not the rule. You should not be waiting to just rush into divorce. I think that's exactly what Jesus is getting at in verses 31 and 32. And then finally, looking at oaths really quickly, verse 33. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn.' But I say to you, don't take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply, let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. This is a lot to take in, but really what this is trying to get at is don't do oaths. Like, we have seen throughout the Old Testament, I think this is exactly what Jesus was thinking of when he said this. Every single oath in the, well, not every single, but most oaths in the Old Testament come back to bite that person, because they don't understand that when you make a promise to God and God makes a promise to you, that is a very big agreement. And do not take lightly saying yes to the Lord for something. Do not take that lightly. And I think that is exactly what is going on here. You have Jephthah in the book of Judges taking an oath when he did not need to, and it cost him the life of his daughter. And so I think that's exactly what Jesus is getting at in verses 33 through 37. Simply put, just don't do oaths. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Again, that sounds very blunt. Well, because it is. If somebody asks you to do something, you don't go, oh, I swear I will do it by the Lord. No, don't do that. Just go, yeah, I could do it. Or no, I can't do it. Or, hey, could you give me a little bit more time and maybe some more information to see if I can do this or not? That would be so much better than just saying, by the Lord's, by the by the promise of the Lord, I will do this. You don't need to go into that. You could just simply say yes or no, and that's exactly what Jesus is getting at. But I think it's all it really comes down to is respecting and honoring the Lord for who he is, and taking absolute value with everything that he says, and again, who he is. So I think that is a little bit about oaths and why you should do them. But now on Thursday, we will continue to look at this structure and look at retaliation and loving your enemies, but going deeper into that. Specifically, loving your enemies is huge because it is, and retaliation too, because Jesus himself personally shows this with his trial and with his crucifixion. And so I definitely wanted to leave that one a little bit more separate so we could spend a little bit more time on those two sections. So we will come back to Matthew chapter 5 and wrap up Matthew chapter 5 on Thursday. But thanks for spending a little bit of time with me today as we go deeper into things like anger, lust, divorce, and oaths. And thank you for being here, and I will see you on Thursday. Thanks.